Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the first ever version of my new book club. Um, quick funny story before we welcome Sebastien, our guest and author for today. I was recently joking with my wife about a book club and saying I don't think I could ever be in one, but that's because I have strong opinions about how I want to spend my time, and I realized what I could do is facilitate one. Because I read constantly. And so I thought I would start this as a way to share the books that help drive my career progress. And then Sebastien saw one of my posts and reached out and said I really needed to read his book, Delivery Man. And I realized that I had bought it in the past when I was talking to him, but I had never gone through it. And then I was overjoyed because time is precious to see he designed it to be really brief. It's only a little bit under 3 hours as an audio recording. So, what we're going to do is we'll chat with Sebastien, who is wonderful enough to be here on short notice to do our first book club. I will comment that I've already announced the next book, and that's Christy Coulter's exit interview. I think Rupali will put the link in the chat, but most of you already know that book or have seen me talk about it. So Christy and I both worked at Amazon in the same period. We may have met, but we don't really remember each other because we worked in very different parts of a large company. What will make that book interesting is her subtitle is The Life and Death of My Ambitious Career. And she never was promoted at Amazon. We joined at the same level. I was promoted twice. She eventually left without being promoted after a very long time. And so I want to discuss with her our different paths and what can be learned from that. What she obviously did is turn it into a bestseller. So she got something out of the experience anyway. But with that, back to Sebastien, who wrote Delivery Man. Sebastien, welcome. Good morning. It's good to see you.
Good morning, Ethan. Good morning, everyone.
So Sebastien and I met many years ago when I was interviewing for a role at Twitch. I was building, I normally talk about my role there as leading commerce, but I also own developer relations. And I was hiring for the leadership of that team. We met, had an interview. It wasn't the right fit or the right timing, but that sort of forms the basis of our relationship today because that was our first in-person contact, as far as I know.
And that's correct. I don't know how much you want me to share, but I think like just to the credit of your leadership skills at the time and still now, as an executive coach, um, you didn't, waited like weeks or so to let me know that it may not be a right fit, right? And that discussion actually happened on our way out to the elevator. I think that was the last interview of the day, and you were rushing to another meeting, and you were kind enough to jump in the same elevator than me and not shy away. And we continued actually the chat that we had earlier in that elevator, and you gave me actually some very good pointers on what it was like to work at Amazon, but also what were the expectations of your team, what you wanted to build for the future. And as you indicated, like I was not the right fit, but not in a way that my experience was irrelevant, but for what your team needed at the time, I was not the fit. And that was a very nice, kind of a bummer for me. But walking out of the elevator, at least I didn't have to like anguish on how did that go and did I do well or no. At least I had my answer.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I've been on both sides, so the waiting sucks. And so anytime I feel I can, I mean, as an executive, I was more in a position to feel confident just messaging a candidate. For a lot of you who do a lot of interviewing, maybe HR is supposed to handle that so that they can give the politically correct message or whatever. Um, I go ahead and do that because I can. But yeah, we had a great talk. And I think it's just better to tell people, this isn't the right fit at this time. but it allowed us to come full circle. You know, that must have been at least like 8 years ago, and you know, come full circle now.
And you know, that gave me the opportunity actually to go and build Zelle. So if you're using Zelle today, so you never know, right? Sometimes the timing, sometimes the serendipity of an event, that got me to move on to something where I build something. I think that's great. So you know, you never know.
And I do use Zelle today, actually. It's you know, it's really quite easy. Of course, Zelle is for paying someone else in the US out of your bank account, sending money to someone else's bank account. This is sort of common technology around the world, but the US has been very slow to adopt bank-to-bank transfers, and Zelle's really the first product there, or at least the first widely adopted product.
That's correct, and it took a while, by the way, and you can look at it as uh, something that's very simple on the surface, but what's happening behind the scene, there's a lot of complexity. So I always you're going back, you know, to the title Delivery Man. I made it look easy as to deliver it and painless for a lot of our partners. The hard reality is behind the scene, there was a lot of movement. I'm gonna be nice.
Yeah, I look, I'll be very honest. I would struggle to work on something that where you had to negotiate a common standard and release plan with lots of big banks. That sounds excruciating to me.
I always joke that my Monday meeting where with the 7 CTOs of these 7 ownership banks, right? And every Monday was a new Monday because I had to explain what we were doing, what was the plan, and I always had like about 3 of the bankers, CTOs were understanding what we were doing and why. Then 2 were, you know, needed a bit more explanation, and 2 had no clue what we were doing, right? 1 or 2. So we always had to go back, and they were never the same. Every Monday was a new set of questioning, right? So we had to constantly like adapt and revise how we were communicating what we were doing. That doesn't mean we were changing our plan, but just to make sure that, again, our partners were comfortable with what we were doing.
So this is actually something, this is the first place maybe, I know we talked about going somewhere else with career advice, and we'll go there next. But since we've gotten onto this topic, briefly, managing executive stakeholders, and particularly that many and from that many different institutions, what would you tell people, you know, your sort of quick advice on how do you manage a collection of executive stakeholders like that of course are distracted and not always tuned in, but yet very necessary, because any one of them can screw up your plans.
Absolutely. So there are multiple angles. The short story is going to be that's the one of the C in the SOCAD methodology is communication. I think that's key for every executive or every delivery person. Is communication is the critical aspect. And the way it works is, yes, you have to communicate. I don't want to say constantly, but you have to keep them informed proactively. Don't wait for the problem to arrive to inform them that there may be a problem, right? If you see something coming and you're not 100% sure, still inform them, communicate that, hey, by the way, we may have to get a quick discussion. And also, again, they have their delivery team on their side, right? They have their operator on their side. Just work with them. Just make sure that they are aware that at least there's an information that is distributed somewhere and that can be shared and most of the time moved up to that executive. So when there is an issue or when there is a big decision to be made, it doesn't come from left field. So again, communication, the big C in SOCAD, communication.
And I agree that you've got to keep those lines of communication open, even when it's frustrating and you feel like I've told you this thing 3 times, I've written it to you. Like,
Yep.
unfortunately, getting frustrated with people who aren't understanding you has no value. It's sort of go outside, scream, come back in, and do it
Yep.
again.
And I think another aspect that and you talked about it, right, is you have to own it, right? If something goes wrong, or if the communication is too intense for the executive or whatever, and you get some pushback, at least just own it and say, okay, I understand. I see what you are saying,
Uh-oh,
or I see
somebody
what you.
froze.
Oh, can you hear me again?
Yes, I'm not sure if you froze or I did. Please go on.
I was going to say, like, again, you have to own it. Whatever is the pushback that may come from the executive, whatever is the problem you're identifying, is own whatever you are communicating. So that's the big part. And I know you mentioned that a few times in your post. Ownership is important. Don't shy away from your responsibilities. Don't shy away from, again, informing or distributing information, even when these are not pleasant.
Yep. Okay. So what I would love to ask you, well, first, for everybody who's listening, I have the Q&A tool running. So if you have questions you would love to ask about this book or for Sebastien, not so much for me, by the way. He's the guest today. There'll be other opportunities if you want to ask me career questions. But Q&A is open. You can put your questions in there. We'll get to some of them at the end, and other people, other viewers, you can vote on them. So what we'll do is we'll take the most voted questions. We may have you come off mute and ask them yourself if you have the most voted question. But what we'll do is at the end, we'll try and have some time for Q&A. So Sebastien, you wrote me this morning and you said my post today really resonated with you. And my post today, if some of you haven't read it on LinkedIn, you can go have a look at it in parallel. But the summary of it is I was talking about the trap of getting caught in overwork and not really the importance of reframing your success to not just be career growth and title for no reason. It's fine to climb a career ladder, but know why. Sebastien wrote me and said he really wanted to talk about that it was important to him. So I'm going to turn the floor over to him to tell his story and share why that resonated with him.
Absolutely. And again, I think we have, as we are leaders or we are, managers, or we all have our own ambition, right? And we all try to climb the ladder. We all are, sometimes overly optimistic on our own skills. But at the end of the day, I run my own rat race. And what I realized is it was bringing toxicity in my life, my personal life. So I had to reframe my mindset on what did I really wanted to achieve and how, right? The whys of what is my ambition and why. The reason I wrote the book, and I don't want to get bummed the mood here, but that was in the media. But a former colleague of mine I was close to just stepped in front of a train, right? So mental wellness, mental health is very important, and finding the reasonable balance between life and work is, for me, something that is critical. That's the reason why this book came to existence. That's the reason why you have the story of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, right? I wanted to be Don Quixote. I wanted to be a CEO. I wanted to be successful before I was 40. I wanted a lot of things, right? At the end of the day, when I took that step back, when I started putting my ideas or words on paper for the book, because that event that happened to my friend really got me, right? I was like, why are we doing that to ourselves? And what came from there was redefining my own ambition, which was, you know what? I've delivered great things for other people. And sometimes they gave me a bit of that, that light. They shine the spotlight on me sometimes they don't. But I accepted that my reward, the most important reward for me, was one, my mental wellness, and two, the pleasure to see the product I deliver being used in reality, in real life. So when you mentioned you're using Zelle, I'm super happy. That make my day, right? It's super basic, but that was one of my reframing mindset. And I think that's important to get the right approach when you are ambitious, and also not let the system get to you, right? Especially here in the US. It was one of the big conflict when I moved to the US, right? So in Europe, you don't brag about your achievement. You don't say, oh, I did these great things, right? That's part of the educational system, is if you do your job, you will be rewarded for doing your job. But just don't go around and say like, hey, I'm the greatest things on earth. And I'm being polite here. When I arrived in America, of course, the first 2-3 years of my career were dull, because I was doing my job very well, but I was not going to my boss and saying, hey, look, today I deliver all of that, right? Or I did all of this. And when it was time for reviews, when it was time for promotion, I was always I was a mid all the time, but I was never exceptional. When in my mind, I was doing exceptional, I could see other people in the team really appreciating what I was doing, saying, oh, well, Seb is great at what he's doing. But they were not going to advocate for me, and I was not advocating for me. And that's the US system. When I understood that, and I started being a bit better about saying, like, hey, by the way, I did that this year, or keeping track of, my achievement, it was still very uncomfortable for me. And
I'm
then,
sure.
you move up the ladder, you observe, the people, how they are doing it, and you emulate and you do the same thing. And yes, you're going to move a bit faster up the ladder. Great. But what I realized too was it was another instrument in the rat race, right? And I wanted to really change the way I've been looking at my career and just be content to what I've done already, right?
So what I tell people first, a lot of people in the US and maybe other places are stalled in a strategy I call work hard and hope to be noticed. And that doesn't work. And a lot of people get hung up either that they shouldn't say what they've done because that's unseemly bragging, which is what you were taught, or some people simply believe they shouldn't have to, that in a just universe, it's the manager's job to recognize what they've done. And to the first complaint, I say, well, there's a difference between bragging and taking credit, reasonable credit. But to the second comment, what I feel is your manager is very busy. As a manager, I had good intentions to recognize everyone's accomplishments. But I'm sure you've heard the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I'm sure I missed lots of things people did. And so you are best served by realizing that your manager isn't intentionally missing what you've done. They need reminders because my to-do list, which is sitting here to my left, even though I'm supposedly retired, is a page long. Things I want to do, things I need to do around the house. I don't remember everything. I do want to just circle back to the beginning of your story again, not to bum people out, but I want to make sure they understood, which probably most people did. Your acquaintance literally stepped in front of a train. This is not a metaphor, right? The thing that drove you to write this book was unfortunately someone took their own life over work satisfaction. And that led you to
Yeah.
pivot and really focus on what am I going to do?
That's correct. And again, he was a dad with two kids, right? And that's what really got me was he thought he was not good enough, right? Because we were talking about review and the manager not having time to check everything. That was after a review, right? That suicide happened in January, right? So that was after the holiday season. That was after a bad review or a review that was mediocre in his mind. And I think he really wanted that promotion or be promoted, and that did not happen.
Yeah. And
So that went into that spiral of like, I'm not good enough, right? And to reach the point where you're gonna take that drastic step to commit suicide and like leave your family and your friends was, for me, that was like a wake-up call or a big shock, right? So I think that was something we need to be conscious and not shy to talk about. With ambition comes stress and potential mental disturbance, and that needs also to be addressed as we're talking about success and climbing the ladder. At what price?
yeah. And I try to talk about that a lot. I agree with you that the price can be much too high if you go down that thought. And so let's talk about what both you and I did. Specifically, I feel one of the reasons I was excited to talk about this book is even though Seb and I met years ago, we had no contact. We pursued our separate career paths before and after, but in many, many ways, we're similar. I resonated with the title of this book because I see myself as a delivery man. And what that means, though, is that Seb in his book uses the analogy and has an image of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. So if you know that book, I'll let him say more about it if he wants. Sancho Panza is the sidekick, the number two to Don Quixote, who's the hero of the story. Now, in the novel, the sidekick has a major role and in some ways is the hero. And Don Quixote's kind of the fool. But to come to life in Silicon Valley, which is what Seb is writing about, all of us are sort of taught by the media that the only real worthy position is to be the founder, to be the Bill Gates, to be the Mark Zuckerberg, to be, the hottest, maybe at some point, love him or hate him, is Elon Musk, to be that pinnacle inventor, the person who's in front. And both Seb and I ended up building careers being the person who gets the visionary's work done. And I know I still wrestle with sometimes, did I shortchange myself? Should I have been bolder and tried to be that person? Seb, it sounds like you wrestled with that and came to a conclusion. So I'll turn it over to you because you wrote the book here.
Absolutely. And I don't know what I can add. You were like very eloquent in I think that you were, I was just like, oh, he's reading my mind. That's very scary. But when you mentioned Don Quixote is kind of the fool, I put it more like he's the visionary that is not sometimes grounded in reality, while Sancho Panza is the enabler, right? The person that actually keep everything and their journey into reality, because that's a journey at the end of the day, but is also, as is what I call the realistic one, or the enabler for the vision or whatever Don Quixote is going for, is also a caregiver to him, right? And everyone has a caring side to them. And as we are, you and I, we delivered things for other people, we may not get sometimes all the credit that we deserve. And I think that's also the other part that we have to accept is, did I get all the credit I deserve for what I've done, right? Because you read the article about the person that goes and talk about it. The Don Quixote is going to go and talk to the media. He's going to do the conferences, or she's going to do the conferences, all of this. And then you are standing here in the shadow, right? And you're just like, but wait, I did everything, right? I did most of the job. And that's what you have to accept is, how much credit do you want to really receive? And that's where actually, by the way, a great leader or a great executive comes in, because you will share a little bit of that success with your team, with your delivery person. And never be shy to step yourself in the shadow and let the light shine on these delivery people, because without them, you are nobody, right? And I think that one of the comment in my book is, behind the scene, in the fashion world, you have the seamstresses, right? The little hands that make these beautiful high fashion dresses. Everyone know the name of the designer. Everyone know the look and how they work and what they do. They are all over the media. No one has any clue that behind this scene, you have actually a chief seamstresses person that actually does the real work from this ugly design, sometimes what people call it art. But if you look at the design of some of these designers on piece of paper, it's mostly like 3 strikes of colors and some shape very well. That's not much, right? And yet you look at the dress that came out of it and you're just like, wow, how did that person that did that dress was able to extract the vision from that piece of paper with a very ugly drawing? And by the way, I'm French, I should appreciate art, but in some cases, sometimes I'm just like, what is that, right?
Yeah, it's you remind me, side story. One time I needed to meet with, you worked in the gaming industry, and I needed to meet with some game executives from France. And I was working with a friend of mine on how to properly say their name, say their names. And he sent me a recording of how to say Yves Saint Laurent for the designer, because one gentleman was Yves and the other was Laurent. And those names, like, we would say Yves for what you would say Yves. So anyway, coming back though to our story here, I agree with you very much on a lot of this. I think it would be fun to talk a little bit for the audience on a place where it seems like, from reading our book, maybe we disagree a little. which
All right,
is,
go for it.
well, you make a couple of strong statements in your book. You say engineers should never be left in charge of design, period, ever, period. And of course, I'm an engineer, and so I'm feeling a little wounded and defensive here. Like, wow, okay. The like I'm getting ready to respond, but and you also say that you didn't feel that engineers, at least practicing engineers who had spent much time coding, made good architects. So talk to me a little bit about your perspective here, because, maybe I feel differently.
So, and today, by the way, I define myself as an architect, right, or a technology product executive. But I was actually on the technology side for a long time. So I manage engineering team. So that kind of came from what I call a place of tough love versus a place of disrespect. But I think the big part here is, and by the way, by design, I mean like the user experience, the look and
Hmm.
feel of a product, not a technology
Okay,
design,
okay.
right?
All right.
That's what I
Now,
mean.
now we agree, because I can't draw a straight line even with a ruler. So
Yeah.
when it comes to art, it's funny, but most people can't draw a straight line very well, but they can use a ruler or a straight edge and do it. But I
Yeah.
always have the problem that I'm pressing so hard the ruler slips. So you get the straight line with two jags in it. So yes, visual design, not my
We,
strong
we,
suit. Please go on.
we'll call it creative design. Uh, but no, so I think that was like the way it came from, and that you probably observed that in some, you deliver like so many products for Amazon, that you have observed that sometime, you have an engineer is gonna go on spare time when they have some, and they're gonna try to create a visual or a
Mm.
flow into a product, and they come back to you and they're super proud of it. And when something, like in today's world, looks like Windows 95, you may have to take a step back and say like, well, thank you, that was great. We'll take that input in, and we'll see how it can turn with the design team, right? With the graphic design team. It's always interesting. And by the way, I'm tempted. I've always been tempted to do that too. And I think the last round of product when at Yodlee, where I was working on delivering this user experience, this developer portals, uh, I try to do some visuals, or what about this that looks that way or that way. And I had the greatest lead in design. Actually, she reminded me that when I was color challenged, I don't see the full full spectrum of colors. So first of all, I was picking colors that were apparently horrible and not aligned with the brand. Uh, for me, they look like it, but they were not
Yeah,
apparently. And then, of course, being French, I was like, yeah, I'm an artist, so I'm gonna show you how it's done, right?
yeah.
And they were coming back and saying like, no, that is not going to look good. And that's part of the, yeah, it does go with the user flow, it's fine, but uh, that is not going to be optimal from a user experience point of view, because actually these guys are good in making sure that you get as little click as possible to do your experience. And that's, I think that's their job. That's the beauty, which make it intuitive, where you don't have to think, you have to click on that button, or you have to scroll, right? And that's what great designer do, as
So
as
now,
visual
now
design.
I understand. I somehow thought you were talking about technical design, and that the
No, absolutely
engineers
no.
shouldn't do technical design. On visual design or creative design, I agree with you. It is funny. You've mentioned being French a couple times, so I have to ask. I know you went to the Sorbonne in Paris, but are you actually
Yeah,
originally Parisian?
absolutely not. No, I
Okay,
was
because you seem much too nice for the reputation of Parisian.
I ended up going to Paris because to a Sorbonne, because that's one of the big university, right? So it's always good to get a
Yeah.
degree from there. But I'm originally from the Loire Valley, which is much more below. I think the biggest activity there is visiting castles or going fishing in the rivers, which is much slower than Paris, and good food and good wine. I think that's more of the, it's a nicer place. If you ever go to France, please do not just go to Paris and say you've been to France. That would be a very different experience there. Go outside, visit some of the countryside, the wine regions. The welcoming will be very different, and the experience will be, in my mind, much more enjoyable.
Well, we have to talk offline. I'm planning a surprise trip. My wife doesn't listen to anything I do like this, so I'm planning a surprise trip for her, and it will include. I have not been to the Loire Valley, but
Yeah,
we are going there. So you and I can talk maybe later about what I have time for, and because it will
yeah.
be our first visit. And so we have a lot of highlights, and there are some wildly fabulous castles, I see.
Absolutely, and I can even give you some of the behind the scenes stories for a couple of these castles, where my mother's best friend was curator for a couple of these. So I grew up actually running behind the tapestries of the castle sometime because I knew the secret doors. So
Oh wow. Well, we will talk offline because it's on my mind, and I've heard um
I, I I will deliver a great experience for your trip. Here you go.
all right. All right. Well, thank you. That will be fabulous. So I did want to I always have so much that I forget to say it. I want to talk to people. You talked about for a minute ago about sharing credit. And let me talk about how I think leaders in particular, but anyone, if you are very uncomfortable talking about your own accomplishments or you think that's too bold, I've come up with two ways that you can share your accomplishments and get the credit you deserve without directly bragging about yourself. One of those ways is if you're any sort of manager or leader or in any sort of leadership role, like the project manager, the delivery man, etc., you can praise your team. If you don't feel comfortable praising yourself, praise either individuals or your team and say, the team had a win this week. It did this. This person on the team, she did that. He did this that is very valuable. How that works for you is you're still the voice and people still know you're the leader. And so what I found as a leader is I could try to give credit away, but what it's almost impossible to give credit away because you give some to this person and some to that person. And what your boss, who's very busy, remembers is they say, oh, Ethan must have a great team. Ethan is working with people who are getting a lot done. And they still end up remembering it's Ethan in the middle. So uh, you can praise team members and you can talk about team accomplishments as a whole team. That's two ways to talk about what's getting done and make sure it gets noticed without having to say I. Seb, anything you would add to that?
No, I think that that's very good point, and that's also the way I was doing it. Right, I uh, never send a praise saying I. Always send a praise saying we. Gets a longer way, and uh, to your point, I'm gonna put another little thing that's in the book, right? Kind of like
Please.
mantra that we're like talk to me by other what my bosses at the time, right? And one of them always say, like you always praise in public and you admonish in private, right? So don't be shy to praise your team, praise someone in your team very publicly, and to Ethan points, you will get some credit out of it, or most of the credit, but that's fine. But if someone in your team does something that is not right, or you do not that may like detrimental to the team, please always have that conversation in private. Never do that in the public setting. That is the best way to lose the trust and ability to manage your team when the team feel that you're going for a reign of terror.
Yes. And I definitely have seen people quit a job over feeling that they were shamed in public. It's a very strong emotion. Shame is one of the most powerful emotions. And I've definitely seen people um leave a job just based on feeling that they were humiliated. Um, because
And by the way, and
humiliation,
and and by
very
the way,
powerful.
people will quit their job on the spot because of that. Most of the time, actually, are the good people, the great people, the one you do not want to lose in your team,
Yeah,
right? And it's
because they
very
have the highest aspirations. They
yeah.
yes, they care the
So it's
most.
yeah.
So what I want to invite people to do, nobody has chosen to type up a question. I'm going to ask Seb one more thing from my list, but here's the bait for those of you who are watching. At this point, when we go to Q&A, if you've asked a question, we're going to answer your question. And I sometimes have to kickstart. So if you put in 45 minutes with us so far, you must have some interest. We have this wonderful expert here. What would you like to know from him? Now, the thing I will ask in the meantime is you worked a lot in financial products. The key deliveries were at PayPal, the banks, MasterCard. Financial products are only sort of short of maybe defense products or healthcare products where they have to be right because someone could die. Well, nobody dies in a financial product, but people lose money, which makes them very upset. As a result, you describe in your book a pretty robust process that I think many Silicon Valley people around you would say, oh, wow, that's old school. It's too heavy. It's too rigid. I think it was appropriate for the products you were working on. But what would you say if I want to be a delivery man in something less critical? You know, you worked your early career in games, for example. If I'm building a game for a mobile phone, nobody dies, nobody loses money. What would you change, or would you say, no, actually, it's still the right way?
Absolutely. And again, when you come from the executive position, you may not see everything that's happening in the trenches, right? So what you read in the book is what is really happening, all the steps that needs to happen behind the scene. And yes, you can bypass some. I think the approach to the way of how to do things is, as much as large company or mid-sized company claim that they're agile, right? At the end of the day, you really only have like the development side of engineering that can be agile. Everything else is still going through the approval cycles of, hey, we need to do that first and that. And there's a very, I don't want to say cumbersome, but process that happen from an approval point of view. Granted, in a startup, that approval can be super fast, can happen in less than a day if you get the founder to come in and say like, hey, we need to do that, right? Congratulations, you get your marching order. Now you can move a bit faster. The other part in the book, and that's where I want to be clarify a little bit, the SOCAD methodology, which comes from the military when you are dropped in a war zone or behind enemy line, and mostly you have to survive. And what happened is that little SOCAD acronym that is used, it's different letters maybe in different countries, but that's kind of, it's always the same framework, is a mental mindset. Is you train for it so you don't have to think about it, right? You know it's ingrained in you, and when you have to apply it in the field, you can go through the motion very fast. And one of the things I mentioned actually that may help, you know, with this heavy process or whatever, I describe the way people will look at SOCAD more maybe from a business product and tech engineering point of view, where one goes from the top down and the other one goes from the bottom to the top. While actually the SOCAD methodology, when it's applied properly, and I've been getting workshop around it, is a circle where you just go around these letters and you can cross around, right? You don't have to follow them in the right order. You have to just adapt to the situation, right? So as you can jump, it's based on what is the situation you're in and what is the problem I'm seeing. So you always follow the process of agile, but you know that as much as I do, Ethan, no product delivery will go absolutely flawless with zero issue. You will have some popping up sometime randomly at 2 or 3 a.m., or you will have the CEO of your company sending you like non-stop emails where you have to survive every hours by trying to gain another 60 minutes by replying to Jeff Bezos and say like, I'm on it, right? So you have to live through that. And that was the purpose of the book. Was I was trying to figure like, how did I deliver all these things? And most of the time actually on time and on budget or under budget, and being able to keep different teams that were not reporting to me to move in unison towards that delivery, right? And that came back as every time I was facing a challenge or an issue, my brain was going back to that training, to that SOCAD methodology and being like, okay, what do I need to do now? And the nice part is like in our world, you know, finance, or you mentioned that no one's going to die for it. Well, in the military, you know, you may die if you don't apply it. right? It's much more decisive from an application point of view. But it did work actually in the financial world. It does work in other industries. And when people realize that it's a mindset, a different mindset to apply on top of existing process, it does make their life easier because you don't stress as much when you see a problem, because you know you can fall back to one of these mechanisms that you put in your brain.
And I would say I've made a pretty good friend in the US military. He's a retired major general, which is our 2-star level. And there's a ton to be learned from military leadership, because the military, going back centuries, are really the first people to think about leadership systematically in many ways. For that matter, arguably going back millennia. It doesn't mean you have to be pro-war or anything like that, but these are a group of people who've thought for centuries about how to get things done when it really matters, and when life is on the line. And so I do think there is, you've borrowed the SOCAD methodology and written about it as the core of your book, I think.
Yep.
I 100% agree with you that there's a lot of wisdom to be taken there.
Absolutely. And so as I was mentioning, the originally, by the way, and it's all of these letters, and I can go through them, but the biggest one is one of the 2C, which is communication. Right.
Yes.
I always go back to that one. That is your core. As you circle around or you jump from one situational letter to the other one, always go back to that C. Communication is critical. That's the only way you're going to get everyone in your team, and not on your team, but that may be supporting you, to be aware of what's going on and what you are seeing.
Okay. So I see, Anand, I see you've asked a question. We'll go to that next. I have a quick question, Seb, for you. I aspire to write a book. I've written some drafts. I'm partway down the process, maybe. You've actually done it. Any comments or words of wisdom about actually writing a book you would share for me?
So first of all is, I always say, do not try to think about writing the book in a linear thing, right? It took me 8 years of writing things left and right, gathering the different ideas. Somewhere on blog posts that I shared before, some were actually in the pile of paper somewhere, or somewhere on my computer. But I told my wife one day, I was just thinking, I think I'm going to write a book. And as you mentioned, she did not listen to me. But then when I put that book on a book stand, she was like, "Wait, what's that?" And I said, "I told you like 4 months ago that I was going to write a book." And he was just like, "Oh wow, I didn't actually think you were going to do it," and I did it. But the way it was written, and I know you mentioned they were like, you had on the audiobook, the structure of the book was kind of hard to grasp, but there was a structure to the madness. But the way I wrote it was not following that structure. That may be why. So I'll go back. There's a version 2 that's going to be coming. But it's you have to write something that is where you're in the mood to write it, right? So I have a chapter about a negativity, and I had to go back to dark places I did not necessarily want to revisit in my career, right? And yet I knew I had to write about it because it's important. Like, you can't talk only about the great things or the positive thing. You have to accept that sometimes in your career you will have step backs, or you will have events that may derail, your climb up to the ladder, or you may even be pushed out of the ladder. That does happen, right? So, but I had to be honest. At the end of the day, I wanted that book to be, like a pseudo memoir guide to project delivery. So I had to be transparent in, hey, by the way, here's what happened. But I had to really frame my mindset that day to write that part, right? And you can change that after that. Like, if you want to write the much more happier part of like, hey, we've been delivering stuff, and seeing someone using the first PayPal mobile app on an iPhone that was released like 3 months before in the wild, in San Jose, that was like super, I was very grateful like to have been part of that, right? So
Absolutely.
you can jump from like, sometimes you will have struggles, and I think that's going to be the hardest part as you're writing the book. It's not going to be to structure it. It's going to be to fight your inner struggles as to how much do I want to say? Do I really want to talk about it? And that's not something I want to revisit, yet I have to write about it, right? It's the hard part.
Okay.
Oh, and by the way, it's never finished. So there's a point of time where you have to accept that, okay, it's gonna need to go out.
Close enough. Ship it.
There is always a version 2, edition 2, or whatever that can be written, but you have to do it. And I've done that for Jean-Louis Gasset, the guy that replaced Steve Jobs at Apple. He was writing a book and he was stuck. And he was in the same spot than I was. He had like these pages all over the place. He had a lot of different blog posts and he was trying to structure the book. So what I did is I helped him actually get his book over the finish line. It's not been released, by the way. It's called Grateful Geek by Jean-Louis Gasset. And what I did is I helped him actually organize his thought and kind of structure it in a way that mapped his mindset. Because at the end of the day, I could map it the way I wanted to read it. But I also knew him closely enough because he's been my mentor for the past 40 years that I could frame the book the way he would be comfortable with. And what it did is actually help him write the last final 3 chapters of his book, because now he could see where it started and to where he wanted to go. And having that book out was for him a big deal because that was for his kids, it was for his family, it was his side of saying the story of what happened at Apple when Steve Jobs was kicked out. There was a lot of things happening, and he wanted to put the record straight, but in a nice way. And the Grateful, there is no like dirty dirt being thrown around. I think he has reached a point where he accepted what happened, and good or bad, he was just grateful for it, and he was just sharing his wisdom. So taking that book over the finish line is also something that's tricky because it's never done. In his mind, he still have like, I can write another chapter, right? And there was a point of time where we're just like, no, stop, time out. The book is great as it is.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, we'll talk about you offered maybe to introduce me down the line, and we might go through his book, which would be fantastic.
Yeah.
So let's go to the question Anand asked. I'll just read it for simplicity. He said, I understand the delivery is the most important aspect to create impact in business. What is your suggestion in navigating the environment where some of the cross-functional stakeholders try to slow down or impede the deliverable in the interest of higher power or influence or resources? So the tail end of this question is slightly unclear to me what the circumstances Anand is referring to are, but I think he's getting at the idea that there's people who are stakeholders who have reasons to slow down the product, whether it's they want to use resources elsewhere, or they want to get more resources for themselves, or they want to show, put you in your place or show that they have power. Basically, it's a little bit politics. What do you do when you run into politically misaligned people? And I'll let you take a shot at that. I may add some things.
Absolutely. And that's actually a couple of chapters in the book actually cover dealing with building your team when actually you don't own the team, and how to manage that. And also the negativity, which is when actually someone tried to derail your project intentionally or unintentionally. Because at the end of the day, you have, that's why I call, the clueless leader, or that's what I call the empire builder, right? Someone wants to build their empire and you're not part of the team. And I've been, by the way, victim of that. Let's be honest here. I've got a team that was kicked out because someone else that got more power and was in another team considered that we were stepping on their playground. And therefore were a danger for his visibility. Very ambitious person. And that person was willing to mostly push aside a whole team to just make sure that they keep control of their little power and of the way to brag to the top brass that, hey, my team is doing that, not them, right? So it does happen. The way you can manage that, I'm going to go back again to communication and sharing credits. When you know that someone is potentially, going to impede your project by, again, bad mouthing what you're doing, or say like, well, it's not important, the budget needs to be done, just share with them and educate them. So one of the example I used is, I was at PayPal, I was using resources, what I call non-officially, right? Skunk project. And because I didn't have a big team and I need some special skills, and they were actually two guys that I met before were in Singapore. So we worked on the project, we delivered what we were doing. And I mean, like they were probably like working extra hours, but we got something out and that looks great. And I was very happy about it. And then I started my tour of Asia to explain that to the different regions and showing the product. And of course, I got the head of PayPal Asia, APAC, that booked a 15-minute discussion with him. So I was super happy. I was just like, wow, I'm on his radar. He's going to talk to me. It's awesome. I walked in, and the first thing he tells me is not even like, hey, how was the trip? Is, so I heard you're using two of my resources. Right there in my mind is, first of all, you just want to morph in the chair and disappear. And two, I can see some of the ongoing project that we are working on with these two people. I can see them being removed from that. And I'm just like, how I'm going to do it. Right. And at that point of time, I was, I probably like stumbled my first couple of sentences being like very weird words. But then I said, tell him like, okay, first, let me show you what we did. And I show him the demo because he had not seen it, right? And I say, okay, that's what we are building. That's where we are going. And that, by the way, then I sold him the vision. I say, and that's where we want to go. And your two resources have this critical knowledge that can make it happen. And that 15 minutes became actually an hour and a half discussion, which was very nice of him to get the time. I could see his EA, his admin was popping her head through the door and say like, more time, less time, more time. And he was just like, more time, more time. So that's always good. Again, communication was important. And then at the end of that meeting, he told me like, okay, I'm going to give you like 3 more guys, but we stop here. So I walked in with, I'm going to lose 2 resources. That was my mindset. And I walked out with 5 resources, which was awesome. We finished a lot of things. But then what happened after that is, as he was a skeptic, he didn't understood what we were doing. After I explained to him what we were doing, he became one of the internal champion for what we were doing. And that's super important because now you have someone that's going to be a champion for your project, which is outside of your team, who's at the executive level. And when you're going to have another executive playing the political game, when you have another executive from another team stepping in and saying like, hold on, I do not agree with whatever that person is saying. And then if your boss is doing their job, it's going to also step in. Suddenly you have 2 people versus 1.
Right. If you can win over a politician, then you get to use all their sharp skills against somebody else,
exactly.
if needed. They become influential for you rather than influential against you. I think what I would add to what you said, and I'm sure you agree with this, is when, and I just lost my train of thought. When you're trying to influence somebody and you need something done, it's really about finding out what is going on for them. Why are they, in this question, why are they opposed to what you're doing and what can you do? This is what you did in Asia Pac. You showed them how what you're doing can be a win for them. In the case of your game, that other person saw you as a threat. And maybe in that case, there was no way to have them see what you were doing as a win for them. But the biggest way to overcome this blockage, Anand, that you've asked about is you have to figure out how to position what you're doing as this is going to be great for you. You have a misunderstanding, and what we're doing is going to give you more profile, is going to make you look better, is going to help you ship a goal that you care about, is going to something for you. And that begins with understanding what is it they really want, because human beings are very clever and they can come up with a reason to oppose anything. It's too expensive, it won't work, it's going to take too long, it's duplicative. We're incredibly clever little monkeys who can always find a rationalization. But what you have to do is try and find out what is their real goal and how can you appeal to that real goal. That's because if you can appeal to what's going to make them of value, then they become an advocate. And so I recognize that's hard, and it is also political in the sense I don't often like to talk about politics because I like to avoid them. But sometimes you need to help them understand. And you saw Seb earlier some of this is just wording. He was really kind in some of his wording earlier. I said something negative, and I can't remember what it was now, but he reframed it as, oh, when that happens, I say this about people, and he reframed it to positive. Reframing your language so that it looks win-win. I wish I could recall, it was early in our discussion, but if you can reframe to the positive for them, this is all about reframing. Reframe your project to be a win for them. Go ahead, Sab.
And,
Anything last
and I
to
will
add?
add, I will add one more thing to that, which will be completing too, right? Because they may have incomplete information, or they may be coming from a world where they are looking only through their lens, right? And you have to understand what is their lens. Other things you probably went through that, Ethan, is you always gonna have to deal with the finance department or the legal department, right? And their frame is just numbers. So your project may be seen as a cost center. Like Seb's project is generating zero revenue. It's not good, or it's spending more than they are generating revenue. That is not good, right? So that's your mindset, is to go and explain to whoever is pushing back to, hold on a second. My project, yes, we may be in a negative, cash flow situation for the project specifics in that little box, but here's the impact that we're having on other teams, right? Now the sales team can onboard new customers in less than 2 weeks instead of 3 months. Now the professional services team can direct their customers, their big customers that are giving us millions or billions of millions of dollars, to that destination, and they can onboard and understand the product without having to spend cycles of support on them, right? Now our technology is also all the backlog queue of tickets that's in the system. Now we're actually purging them because they find their answer up front, and we're not gonna get new tickets coming up, right? So you have to show that there is value, and I call that the soft credit, right?
Yeah.
So you have to take credit for the hard credit, the visible one, but you also have to educate about the impact and the soft credit that sometimes your project or your product is doing for the overall company. And then that will change the mind frame, because now they have more complete information. Their visibility goes outside of what they were thinking about, but it's still framed into their mindset. You talk about soft credit, that's a number. For an accounting or finance department, that's what they want to understand.
Yep. I agree. It's you have to speak the language. I often say, just as a short phrase people can remember, and we can wrap up on this. I often say it doesn't matter what you want to say, it matters what the other person can hear. And so you may want to talk about how great the engineering is or something, or how revolutionary the product is, but with a finance person, you may need to talk about cost and revenue. And with a legal person, you may need to talk about risk and risk mitigation. And it doesn't matter. We fall into traps where we want to talk about the value we see, not the value others care about or the risk they care about. So, Seb, we're at an hour. We've had a great conversation. I can't wait offline to pick your brain about your home, because it is in my near future, just a few months away. But for everyone else, I will just say I'm going to stop the recording in a minute. So if you're watching this later, we're about to end. We haven't scheduled it yet, but about once a month, I'll do a book. Sometimes I'll draw from my greatest hits, books I've read in the past and feel are worth revisiting to talk about. I do think it's important because so many people wonder about Amazon careers. To have Christy Coulter and her book Exit Interview, The Life and Death of My Ambitious Career, I think it's important because I had such a satisfying Amazon career, and she's written a book about how it didn't work out in some ways for her, to have that contrast, because we were there at the same time with theoretically the same conditions. And for Delivery Man, delivery is, without delivery, it's just, I often say code that doesn't ship is just an art project, right? And that isn't, ultimately, that isn't very satisfying for even the engineers. you build beautiful things, or the designers, you build beautiful things and they don't go out the door. It's just an art project nobody sees.
Absolutely. And that's probably that's why I wrote the book is how can you bring your idea or the ideas of others to reality and be able to observe them in the world. And that's the greatest reward. I feel like when you can share that with others, you know, with coders, with engineers, with project managers, even your exec, but just being able to see that and many years later, even if you're not involved with that project, to still be see that project being used. I always love when someone asks me if I can use Zelle to send them money, and if I know it works, right? It's always crack me up. I always have a smile saying, "I'll figure it out. Do not worry about it. I'll figure out how Zelle works."
I'm sure, yes. You know what Zelle is? Can you use it? Yeah, that's funny. All right, well, Seb, I'll let you go. We'll follow up offline. And everyone else, let's see, recording. There we go. Recording stopped.